Hello, I'm Aaron, pastor of Executive Ministries at Left Hand Church. Pastor of Executive Ministries at Left Hand Church. If you've been with us for a few months, you know that Jen and Paula do the preaching, and I'm normally doing executive type things. You didn't expect me to be standing here about to preach, did you? Neither did I. This was not in my life plan. In fact, this whole pastor career wasn't in my plans either. And yet, here I am. If you would have asked me 4 years ago where I'd be standing right now, I would have told you this. Or this. Maybe this, but definitely not this. For those of you out of town, that's Longmont. Oh. And yet, here I am. So, how did I get here? 4 years ago, almost to the day, I walked into the technology company that I had built and announced that I had sold the company to a multinational Japanese conglomerate that also made body armor and textiles, two things I still know nothing about. The plan was to work for the buyer for the contractually obligated 2 years, and then sell everything else, hand my dog back to my ex, and eat, pray, love my way around the world while starting the next business on my laptop. As they say, the best laid plans often go awry. 4 events happened that prevented that around-the-world adventure. First, the contract to sell my company fell apart into a massive ball of fire. It's a long and complicated story, and I'm not legally allowed to talk about most of it. Needless to say, it was a difficult period. Out of that mess, my attorney helped me regain ownership of the company, and I parted ways with the buyer. Second, I met this guy. Chad and I met on one of those dating apps. This particular app shows all of the popular guys around the world on the first screen. And there he was, Mr. Popular. I thought he was cute, so I woofed at him. Now, think of a woof like a Facebook poke, only more attuned to the dating rituals of the gay male. Chad was living in Phoenix, and I was living in Colorado. We dated long distance for 10 months before he moved to Denver. He's now in the process of establishing a naturopathic medical practice and working weekends in a hospital, so he's often not able to join us here at Left Hand. Third, I met these 2 remarkable women. I had been attending Highlands Church for about 2 years before I was asked to tell my story at the annual New Year's Stones of Remembrance service, in which various community members tell how God had moved them during the previous year. It's a really amazing service. I had briefly met Paula a few months prior and seen her preach, but this service was the first time I really got to meet them both. They told their story together. Much of it they told here in January and February at Left Hand. After that day, I asked Paula out to lunch, where I told her about my background and how I felt like I could maybe help this nagging problem I saw of not enough places in the country having an inclusive church like Highlands. Fourth, 2 years ago, almost to the day, I went here to Mexico, and my life took another unexpected turn. This is Puerto Vallarta, which is like a second home to me. I go often, Chad and I go often. This photo is of the beach taken on that trip 2 years ago. I packed what I thought was a light beach read, Rob Bell's How to Be Here. If you're unfamiliar, Rob Bell is the former Michigan megachurch pastor turned best-selling author and friend of Oprah. I knew How to Be Here would be a quick read, fluffy enough for the beach, but still worthy of my time. Now, I promise you, there wasn't a drop of tequila involved. But as I flipped the pages of that book, it's as if God had flipped my life upside down. Suddenly, for the first time in my life, I felt called to go do something. God, through Rob Bell, was saying, you create your life. You get to shape it, form it, steer it, make it into something. And you have way more power to do this than you realize. What you do with your life is fundamentally creative work. The kind of life you lead, what you do with your time, and how you spend your energies, it's all part of how you create your life. All work is ultimately creative work because all of us are taking part in the ongoing creation of the world. When you pursue your path, pay careful attention to things that make you angry and get you all riled up and provoke you to say, someone should do something about that. The someone may be you. The someone may be you. Yikes, that someone was me. That was the first time in my life I had ever felt so clear about my career. In that instant, I felt called to do something about this problem of not enough places in the country having an inclusive church like Highlands. And to do something about the 16-year-old gay kid in Omaha, rejected by his conservative fundamental family. He's understandably cursing God and the church and won't ever look back. And to do something about the woman who felt called to pastor, but who wasn't allowed to because her church had a limited view of a woman's place in the home and in the church. And I felt called to do something about the church having so much power that if it can do that to these people on the minorities, on the margins, it was powerful enough to do that to anyone it wanted. My purpose in life was suddenly clear, which was a new experience. You see, the first half of my life was built primarily on stumbling into things. I grew up on a farm in Vicksburg, Michigan, population maybe 3,000. I was a nerd. Actually, I am a nerd, but I was a nerd, preferring to stay inside and play on the farm's new IBM PC than to be outside driving a tractor. From third grade on, I was part of a group of accelerated students who stayed with each other throughout high school. To this day, 7 of those classmates are still my best friends. I was senior class president. I excelled, but it just happened without much effort. Easy. As a high school junior, I applied to various universities that seemed cool. I naively had no idea why I should have picked one or the other. After being accepted to all 5, I ended up at Hillsdale College, the one that seemed like it'd be the best fit. In retrospect, all of them would have been fine. Easy. After college, I turned my part-time computer job on campus into a full-time one. Easy. And then I realized I was gay. With a degree from and a job at one of the most conservative colleges in the country. So I needed to get the heck out of the small college town I was living in. I applied for exactly one job in New York City and got it, solely because of where I went to college. While I had some difficulties coming out, life was still easy. That job in New York was as an online producer at National Review, working for William F. Buckley Jr., the 20th century's most prominent conservative. Life just sort of happened in the first half of my career. Things were easy, and I didn't put much, if any, effort into the long view. I could only see a few feet ahead of me. I suppose that's normal for a 20 and 30-something-year-old. But back to the beach in Puerto Vallarta, I could suddenly see miles ahead. I hadn't heard a booming voice. Instead, it's as if something in my brain and my heart clicked, and my whole being was in alignment and complete clarity for what I should do next in my life. I felt called to go do something new and terrifying. I knew I wouldn't be able to easily stumble into this next phase of life. God was handing me direction and clarity, but it was going to be up to me to fill in the details. To be honest, I freaked out. I paced the beach back and forth for what seemed like hours. I cried. I schemed ways to ignore this calling. I knew that if I accepted it, life wouldn't be so easy anymore. Finally, I got back to my room and I composed a long and probably crazy-sounding email to Paula. Telling her what? For the first time in my life that I felt called to go do something? I didn't send that crazy email, but instead slept on it. The next morning, I trashed that draft and instead sent a simple, "Hey, can we get lunch?" And after returning to the States, I laid out the crazy in person over lunch. Meanwhile, I was still running the company that I had regained ownership of. However, nothing there seemed to make sense anymore. Things that were easy before were suddenly extremely difficult. And I was reminded why I sold the company in the first place. So I made the difficult decision to shut down the company. And that began more than a year of a very challenging transition in my life. I was facing something I'd never experienced before, a large space of complete and utter nothingness. And this allowed me to spend intensive time with Jen and Paula figuring out how our individual callings fit together to create our world together. We spent more than a year dreaming, exploring, planning, filling in the details. Paula and Jen forced me to hike in the mountains where they do their best thinking, and I do my best wheezing and whining. You can ask them about it afterwards. And out of that time together, here we are today, Left Hand Church. So what exactly is this calling business? As an entrepreneur, I naturally see problems all around me, problems that I work out in my head how I'd solve. I'm constantly walking into a business, internally solving what I think their problems are. Most of the time, I keep those solutions to myself. No one wants to be that guy. The problem that I was seeing was that a few people in this country have access to a church like Highlands or Left Hand. Go look for a vibrant and growing inclusive church community in Topeka or Atlanta or Kalamazoo, and you won't find it. Now, when I say inclusive, I don't just mean my LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters. I mean all of God's people. According to Church Clarity, a group that tracks church policy, 0% of the 100 largest churches in the U.S. have affirming LGBTQ plus policies. Furthermore, only 7% are led by a senior pastor of color, while people of color are 38% of the U.S. population. And shockingly, just 1% are led by a senior female pastor who happens to be co-pastor with her husband, while women are 50% of the U.S. population and 8% of Fortune 100 CEOs. If you look at the stats for the next few thousand churches, you'll find similar stories. I know this world well. I grew up in a conservative, fundamental, non-denominational, Bible-believing church. This world I come out of tells me that I can sit in the pews, I can tithe, but I'm fundamentally unworthy of volunteering, of being married, or preaching a sermon in that church. Meanwhile, younger generations are leaving churches in droves. I won't get into the stats, But according to the Pew Research Center, younger generations just aren't buying the Christian church as we know it. As CNN summarized the Pew study, older generations of Americans are not passing along the Christian faith as effectively as their forebears. In other words, Jesus is slowly becoming irrelevant, and this is a problem. Part of it is a bad hermeneutic, what I strongly believe is an incorrect way of reading Scripture. And part of this problem is a bad way of organizing. Usually in these conservative churches, power rests with a senior male pastor and with a small group of men who control the church. At Left Hand, this is why we have 3 equal pastors and why we are baking gender equity into our governance and DNA. Having been the sole head of a 15-person organization before this, I am grateful to work alongside Jen and Paula, not just for their friendship and to have someone to lessen the burdens of starting a church, but mainly because their gifts make me better at what I do and make Left Hand Church a better church. And they feel the same way about my gifts. The 3 of us complement each other in ways I've never experienced before, and it's beautiful. I have some experience in helping to build organizations. A calling is when you recognize a problem and understand that your solution lies within your creation. My background in building and organizing and scaling lends itself to application in the church, in this church. I'm called to organize and to build, to help fundraise, to oversee finances and facilities, to communicate who we are as a community. In other words, I feel called to make sure Left Hand Church is a healthy organization. While this might be my first sermon preached in a church, I have spoken to similar-sized groups as an entrepreneur. In those situations, my goal was to always sell something. When I sat down to write this sermon, I went back into sales mode and was a little lost. Am I supposed to sell you something? Sell you something? No. But I'm here to pass on an incredible gift I have been given over the last 5 years from being in a church that has an expansive and inclusive view of God. And it's this. I was created by God, and that creation is good and it's perfect. I am made in His image. I am loved by God, and nothing I do, good or bad, can separate me from that love. At Highlands Church over the past 5 years, I have been shown this expansive love by all types of people. By people like Lisa and Vernon in my small group. By Susan, who is currently exploring her calling into ministry. By Lisa Cohn, who gives tirelessly of her time and her talents. By Joe Quillen, who also sits on Left Hand's Leadership Council and is pouring energy and love into making sure Left Hand has a solid foundation for the future. By Paul and Jill and Jason and Mark, Jenny, Rachel, I could go on and on. It's my prayer that a similar story emerges from Left Hand in the coming years. The simple act of being allowed as a gay man to worship, to serve, and to lead alongside these people, young and old, gay and straight, single and married, has been profoundly redemptive, healing, and reflective of who I know God is. These people have shown me the depths of God's grace and love like nothing I have ever been given before. And here's the thing about that gift. Once you receive it, once you accept it, and once you internalize it, it's contagious. It's so contagious that you have no choice but to share it with others. So here I am, standing here giving a sermon as a reluctant pastor, having thrown aside my previous life plans. My new plans, my calling, is to take the beautiful gift I've been given and to spread it, to build upon it, to organize others to receive it, to scale God's love as much as I possibly can to Longmont, to Boulder County, and beyond.